Hey everyone, welcome back to Seeking Witchcraft. I'm your host, Ashley, and today I have on special guest Aerik and Selene to talk about quite a different topic compared to some of my other episodes. So, this episode, we're going to be discussing witchcraft and incarcerated prisoners. So, with that said, Aerik and Selene, welcome to the show. Please go ahead and introduce yourself.
Hi, Ashley. It's an honor to be here. Thank you for having us on the show. I am Aerik Arcadian. I am a third degree Gardnerian high priest and a musician. And along with my wife, Selene, here, we run a coven in South Florida, and we also have a prison ministry.
Hi, Ashley. I'm super excited to be here. We said my name is Celine. My husband and Eric and we run a coven here in South Florida, Circle of the Hornedmoon, and I'm also a part of the Mount Shasta Goddess Temple. And we've been doing this prison ministry for about a little over a year. Mm-hmm.
Amazing. Well, thank you both so much for coming on. Um, First and foremost, before we get into anything with this topic, just for the listeners, I think it is really important to acknowledge that the topic of prisoners and being incarcerated and that whole system can be quite political. And that is not what this episode is about. This episode, Aerik and his wife run a prison ministry, as they mentioned, and they approach him with this topic as they've seen firsthand what this looks like in the prison system. And quite frankly, I have had many messages and emails over the years since I started the podcast from people who are incarcerated, um, you know, asking for an episode on this topic. And so when Aerik and Celine approached me saying they had experience with this, I was like, oh my gosh, that's amazing. Like, let's do it. Like, what a topic to discuss. I know that the folks that are locked up very rarely get acknowledged. And so, yeah, I'm super excited to see where this episode leads to. I think it's going to be a really cool learning opportunity to hear about working with this population. And yeah, I'm really excited to see how this conversation is going to unfold.
Us too.
Yeah. It's kind of funny, actually. It's a little bit circular. The way we found out about your podcast was through our guys on the inside. So
Yeah, it's funny that that happened. So, for the listeners, right before we started this podcast, Celine had asked if I knew how people were accessing my podcast on the inside. And I have found out over the years, I found it a couple years ago because I got it from a message from one of the people who was locked up. They had told me that depending on the prison, they are allowed access to a tablet. And within this tablet, they can listen to podcasts. And since Seeking Witchcraft is in the religion and spirituality category, that is how it comes up. And that's how prisoners are able to listen to the podcast because it is a religious podcast, as it turns out. And so, yeah, that's kind of how it came to be. It's been interesting. Yeah, I remember the first couple times I got those messages, I was like, how are these people accessing my podcast? I just assumed that they maybe had heard about it before, but yeah, it's been an interesting ride.
That's great that you're putting out resources for the people who are inside. From what we heard, they love you.
Oh.
They learn so much from every episode that you have.
Oh, that's really sweet to hear. So I guess I should start off like, God, there's so many directions we can go in this conversation, but let me start off with you two and ask, so how did you get involved in this? Like what led you to being part of a pagan ministry and for incarcerated individuals?
well, it definitely wasn't something that we sought out to do originally, but we had some friends who were volunteering at another facility a little bit further north of where we live. And through their chaplain, they had heard of a need that was closer to us, another chaplain that was requesting Wiccan services in the facility that he worked at. So they put out kind of like a group message, and we thought about it for a little bit, and I guess we just kind of felt like we should help out if there was a need. So we got some contact information and emailed the chaplain and got involved however we could.
Yeah, and we started a very long process of being approved to be able to do this.
Now, is this something that anybody could essentially volunteer to do, or do you have to show some sort of certification? Like what did that process kind of look like?
So we didn't have to show any certification per se. We just, when we got in touch with the chaplain, he asked us who we are and what we do. So we said, we're third degree Gardnerians, we have a coven. and we're looking into more information. We call and we didn't know exactly what we were going to expect. He never asked us for any type of proof of anything. The only thing he sent us was an application that we both had to fill out. And then he asked us to take our fingerprints. And after that was done, then we have some online training to do.
Yeah, I will say that it might depend on the particular level of the facility that you are going to, whether it's a state or federal prison. They might have different guidelines. And for what it's worth, we did get ministerial credentials just in case anybody asked for them. But, so far, nobody's asked for them.
Oh. So what does a typical day look like when you go into, like, can you walk me through, like, I guess you go in through the front door, and do you meet with people? Like, what's that whole process look like?
So when you get in, first of all, you can't bring any sort of funds or any cash. So it's like as soon as we park into the facility, we take our jewelry, most of our jewelry off. We leave our funds. There's a certain dress code that you have to follow. And then we sign in as volunteers. If we're bringing anything that's tool wise, we make sure that we have a memo that has been approved beforehand. And then we go through security like everybody else. We get pat down lightly, and then we go inside.
Yeah, there's a series of doors that you have to go through before you're actually on the inside, past the fencing and all the security doors. The process takes sometimes between 15 and 20 minutes to actually get inside if it's a good day. Because they also do visitation, and the days that we volunteer normally coincide with the visitation days. So we're kind of in line with a bunch of other people trying to get inside. But once we get inside, we go a little bit different direction down a different hall, and they let us in. We walk to the chapel. Sometimes we even get a key that unlocks the chapel. Sometimes we don't have keys, and we have some issues getting inside places.
So once you're inside the chapel, and once you're in there, so I'm guessing you do some sort of service in the chapel. Is it always in the chapel, or do you meet with people one-on-one?
So the chapel is like a big building that has small rooms. Sometimes we get to go to the bigger church looking like a building, and sometimes we are in the library, or sometimes we're in a small room. It really depends on what else is going on, because we're not the only people who are volunteering. There's different religions and different groups that get together sometimes on the same day. Our group is between, I want to say right now, 5 guys, so it's not really big, and it depends on what we're doing that day. Sometimes we do ritual, especially if it's around the Sabbath, or sometimes we provide lessons, kind of like Wicca 101.
So I'm so curious, like, could you walk me through like what a ritual looks like in like the chapel? Like, do you get to, I don't know, put on any sort of robe or anything? I'm guessing not, because it's a dress code, as you mentioned, but I don't know, like what tools do you get to use in a ritual like that?
So I am not a fan of robes regardless.
That's totally fair. They get really hot anyway.
I always wear dresses. So my prison dress is long and black and sort of like roby like.
Okay. So when the other prisoners see you walking down the hallway, they're like, "Oh yes, the witches are here."
Yes, actually, when we went in for getting our ID badges, somebody stopped us and was like, "Excuse me, are you going to be the high priest and high priestess of the prison coven here?"
And we were like, "How do you know?"
That's so funny.
Yeah, there must be something that says witch when we're walking around.
Maybe. But yeah, like what do these rituals entail when you're in there?
So tool wise, we have a little box that we keep at the institution. We get to have bowls for water and salt. We have our little god and goddesses that are actually soap.
Oh.
But they're shaped. So they're shaped like the triple moon and the horn god. We can have incense in the form of a stick. We can't have any atoms, of course. So
yeah,
we use
that would
I'd
imagine.
Fingers,
Yeah.
When we cast circle, we hold hands and we do like
hand to hand. I cast a circle. I think that's pretty much it for our prison tool set. We do have a couple candles that, if we can get access to the lighter that is sometimes hidden in one of the offices, then we can light the candles and the incense too.
So
Oh, that
a
must be
normal
nice.
ritual, usually we cast circle, we call the quarters, and it's usually them who are calling the quarters. We bring in the goddess, we bring in the god. If it's a Sabbath, we talk about information about what the Sabbath is, what the god and the goddess are doing, how we celebrate it normally. When it comes to workings, we're very, very limited, so we have to get creative. Most of the times, that means working with tarot cards.
Or a meditation.
We've done meditations as well, yes.
I remember watching this one episode of it was some A&E show about somebody who was in prison, and she didn't have tarot cards, so she made her own out of like magazine clippings or something, and they were like these really big sheets of paper, but she used to give tarot readings essentially with them. I completely forgot about that until you mentioned the tarot cards.
Yeah, I heard some of the guys talking about at least trying to make a deck before. We were able to get a deck in with some of our donated supplies, so that's in like our little box of tools that we have access to. Theoretically, they may be able to have their own deck depending on what type of facility they're into. And if you've got a tarot deck, then you almost have like a full set of magical tools there.
Some of the guys have crystals and they made like necklaces where they had crystals hanging and they will put them on every time that we had circle, which I thought it was really cool because it's kind of like when you wear your circlet or when you wear a pentagram, right?
Oh yeah, I guess I never really thought that about that being an option for some prisoners able to have crystals in them or in with them.
Yeah, there's a lot of things that we learn as we go. They tell us what they do. For example, I remember this one guy, he said they can't have besoms, but he found a feather, so that made that his besom.
Oh, that's cute.
And I find that very inspirational because sometimes us we're like, oh, I don't have the perfect tool, or I need to find this perfect whatever, fill in the blank. Over there, they're really trying to work with whatever it is that they can get their hands into.
We get spoiled by our tools and by our ability to go outside and put our feet in the grass whenever we want.
Yeah, I think it's cool to think about the alternative things that people have used, like using a feather for besom. I wouldn't have thought about that, but that actually works out pretty nicely. You had mentioned a minute ago about like an item being donated. Is this like something people like? Are people able to donate things like tarot decks to prisons? Is that like? I guess it also depends on the facility, right? But is that something that people could do?
Yes, it's going to entirely depend on the cooperation of the local facilities administration and the chaplain there. But for instance, everything that we bring in goes as a donation. We have to fill out donation paperwork to get anything in. Books, the magical tools. We try to bring refreshments when we go to. So, like, I have to fill out a donation form before we do that as well.
So with these things, like let's say the god and goddess statue made out of soap, like are those things that you have to leave there every time you go in and out?
Yes.
Ah, interesting. Okay, I can see how that can get pretty pricey over time.
Yes. So also when we say donation, sometimes we put it out there into our family, a spiritual family, like we're doing this. Is there something that you want to donate? If you have any extras, we're always happy to take. I think last year we were at a festival, we were at Summer Magic, and the people that host the festival, they put it out there for every guest. And they said, if you have extra books, please bring them and we'll donate them to the prison ministry. So we ended up getting about 20 books or so, which was really, really nice of everybody.
That's incredible. Well, I guess while we're on this, do you have like an email address or anything that people could contact you if they wanted to donate supplies for the cause?
Yeah, absolutely. Our coven email is circleofthehornedmoon at gmail.com. And also on my website, ericarcadian.com, I have a contact page that people can fill out and send messages.
All right, perfect. Not to get ahead of anything, of course, but I will put all of that in the episode description for this episode. So if anybody is interested in helping to donate to the cause, you will have the email address in the website.
That will be great. Thank you.
Of course, of course. So let me ask I guess if people wanted to find out about their local facility near them to donate, they could just like go. Is there just usually like a contact email, or is there like a particular person? Like I know you got involved in this through a chaplain. So would it be better to try to find the chaplain of like local facility, or should they just try to contact the prison itself? Like, what would you recommend?
So, for a lot of institutions, the chaplain will be listed on the website with a phone number. Sometimes they're not listed. Either way, the phone number is connecting you to a prison and someone doesn't always answer. So it's sometimes it's a little frustrating to try to make the initial contact or to get through to somebody, but don't let that stop you, because if you keep calling, someone will answer and someone will give you the information that you need.
Okay. And then let me ask, on the flip side of that, if somebody is incarcerated currently and they're listening to this episode and they don't have a prison ministry, would the chaplain be the person they speak to, or some administrative office about inquiring to get a pagan ministry in?
I think the chaplain will always be the first place to go. And if they don't have any help, we're not promising anything here, but they can always try to reach out to us or have the loved ones reach out to us, and we will try to connect them as far as our limitations can go with somebody.
Great. Yeah, that's amazing. So, I guess I should ask, do you find that the people who are getting involved in this ministry were those who were previously inclined to paganism or found out about it in prison, or it could just be a mix of anything?
There's like a huge mix of everything. You have people who have been practicing for way longer than I have. And then you also have the person that's curious about it, who heard about like this Wicca thing and they want to know what it is. How is it different than the other 50 Christian programs that the institution has?
Yeah, it's definitely a good mix of not just skill types, but also traditions and viewpoints. Because it's not like you have guard prison ministry and an Alexandrian prison ministry and like the Druid prison ministry. At least not in our facility. You know, we just have like generic Wicca, and in fact, we were asked to do things as generically as possible to be the most inclusive of like all Wiccan adjacent religions.
I'm curious. So, for those who are in, do you find that they typically can only really practice this form of religion, or Wicca, when they meet with you, or do you know if the folks are able to kind of do things on their own?
So the Wicca prison ministry in this particular facility it's new. At the beginning, we would meet with them every other week on a Saturday, and then they could meet on the Friday that we're not there. And then that was taken away for a
Oh
while.
no.
Yeah, it sucks. It sucks because if we talk about like the ugly part of this program is that sometimes things happen within the institution and there are lockdowns, and those lockdowns can last a few days or it can last a whole month. So when there are lockdowns, we can go. And if we're not there and they cannot meet, then they can practice their religion, which is not nice. But that was reinstated as of I want to say like a month ago or so. So even now, if we're not there, they still have a day a week where they meet.
Yeah, I think it's officially referred to as a sponsor, and depending on the facility type, the presence of a sponsor, like a volunteer, may be required before they allow the inmates to assemble.
So, on the days where they were meeting without both of you there, do you know what they were doing or what they were able to do?
So they wouldn't have access to our supply box. They were just kind of put in a room and allowed to talk. Maybe they were just like sitting around talking about spirituality, or I believe for a while they were also trying to practice some meditation concepts.
Yeah, or even practicing circle and ritual. Like I remember we had a guy who had a hard time calling the quarters and coming up with the appropriate words to call the quarters. And I know that he was really practicing and writing down his own callings. It's sweet. It's cute.
Well, it's definitely such a special and important work that you both are doing. Do you know, like, so when you meet with the folks that are in prison, do you find that they just usually tend to want to do like some sort of ritual with like a meditative practice, or is there like a focus on doing spell work for any particular outcome? Or I mean, I guess it could be a mixed bag.
I think they really just want to do anything. They're usually really excited to participate.
Yeah, like the last few weeks or so, we've been doing divination, and they were really excited about it.
So I'm very curious. Like, so I'm assuming the divination was done through tarot, but is there any other types of divination that you find they're able to do on their own?
Well, you can, you have to use what you have available. So, for example, we
Right,
talked
right.
about doing divination with coins, right? Easy things like that. We did a little bit runes where you kind of have to like make your own.
That could be kind of fun, I think.
Yeah, we've talked about scrying too. We've really just tried to go over like what's practical and doesn't necessarily require a whole lot of tools or investment, and they seem to be really interested in stuff like that.
Right. Even like using the books that they have, if, for example, like they ask a question and opening the page of a book and see what that comes up, what sentence they read, what kind of message is coming through, things like that.
Have you noticed any stigma within the prison for those who are Wiccan or are practicing this?
The honest answer,
Yeah.
yes. Yes. And I really try not to let it bother me, but sometimes it's hard not to take it personal.
Yeah, I can imagine. As you mentioned earlier about there being, so many different Christian programs or opportunities available. So I can imagine being part of a non-mainstream religion, definitely some stigma. But then when you add in that it's Wicca and that there's witchcraft involved in it, I can definitely imagine there being some stigma for that, unfortunately.
Yeah, it seems recently it's been especially divisive because there's a policy, and I don't know if this was a policy that existed for a long time and they're just now starting to enforce it, or if it's a new policy. But basically, you can only attend the specific religious services that matches your paperwork. So
Oh,
there were some guys who had been coming to our meetings for a long time and had never filled out official paperwork, but for some reason were marked down as having Christian as their religion. So they were not allowed to come for a while to our meetings because they had to get that updated to Wicca. And if you are marked down as Wicca, then you can't go to any of the other services that go on in the chapel. So it's a little divisive.
It is. And then there's been, I want to say, at least 3 times where I wasn't allowed to go inside because, quote, dressing code, unquote, where to me it didn't make sense because it's like I wear the same thing all the time. So I'm not sure exactly what's wrong today. But I also learned I can like make a scene. It wouldn't help anybody.
do you think that that was from discrimination from the prison itself, possibly?
It definitely seems like they look at what we're doing a little bit more so than some of the other religions that they would be more comfortable with because they're more familiar with.
Yeah, I can definitely imagine that. I guess, do you have any advice for anyone who is listening that I don't know if they experience or if they try to go to their administration about bringing something like this in, like their chaplain, if they experience stigma, is there really anything they could do about it?
I will say just don't let that get to you. And I know I have to walk the talk as well, but it's at the end of the day, the bigger picture is you're doing something for somebody else that is not you. So even if you feel personally attacked, just release it, let it go, and continue to do the work. This is what we're here for.
And keep in mind that Wicca is a federally recognized religion within the correctional program. So it's listed. If you go to the Bureau of Prisons and you pull up their religious information brochures, you'll see Wicca is listed in there. So they do have to make accommodations for people so that they can practice their religion.
That's a pretty fair point to bring up. That also goes for those who might be in a different situation, like, for example, needing to take off school for a religious holiday. Like, this is a recognized religious religion. Sorry, that was a weird sentence. But this is a recognized religion, Wicca. And I think people sometimes worry about reinforcing that with an authority figure for whatever reason. But yeah, it is federally recognized.
Yeah, it's just there's a stigma that comes with it,
Yeah.
unfortunately.
It's new. They're not used to it. With the administration's not used to it. So we're kind of like trying to pave the way so that it's a little bit easier in the future, and hopefully we don't make anybody too upset.
No.
Yeah, but I remember the day that we had to bring in all the books that were donated and they had to be checked. And we can see the faces of the guard that were checking the books. They were like shocked, surprised, I don't know.
They look like they wanted to put on an extra set of gloves before they touch the books.
Oh man. Well, you know what? Let them be uncomfortable. That's
Yeah.
fine. And if anything, it adds a little bit of humor on our end. Unfortunately, not humor though for those who may have limited access because of stigma, though.
Yeah, and speaking of that limited access, we have been in the chapel library, and I will tell you that all of those shelves are filled with books on Christianity. Like 95% are books on Christianity. So there's really no resource material, at least in the facility that we volunteer in. So if you have a way to donate books to your local facility, the people in that facility are going to be very appreciative of it.
You know what's funny about that is I feel like paganism has had such a big boom, especially since the pandemic. I think a lot of people were diving very deep into their spirituality, and Wicca and witchcraft and paganism and this whole topic overall, I think just got so popularized, which is not necessarily a bad thing, but it reminded me that pre-pandemic, when I would go to my local bookstore, just a regular bookstore, to look for books on Wicca, there was this little tiny shelf and it was just, hidden in the back of the store, and that was all I could really find. But I want to say like 2-3 weeks ago, I was walking near a Barnes and Noble and I looked inside. I didn't go inside the shop. I was going to a shop like next to it. But when I walked by this Barnes and Noble, I looked through one of the front windows, and right there on display was the entire pagan, witchcraft, Wicca section facing out for people to see. And it was like the whole shelf. And I was pretty stunned, actually, because I don't think that would have been the case a long time ago. Back in the day, they used to try to hide that in the back. Now it was front and center for any passerby in the street to see it right there, to be drawn in to come see what those books are about. So hopefully that can one day translate in the prison system where the pagan type books are a little bit more populated. But I guess that starts with people like us to donate said materials.
Yeah.
Absolutely,
Yeah.
it does.
And they get so excited when they get books. Like they were fighting over the books.
Oh,
When they saw Scott Cunningham, their eyes lit up like you wouldn't believe.
I bet.
It is. It's just little things, just like lighting incense. And one of the guys said it's been years since I didn't smell that.
Oh.
So even if we don't have ritual, we try to light an incense whenever we're there.
Yeah. So let me ask you then, for those who are incarcerated who are listening to this podcast, I know we've kind of scattered some examples throughout this episode, but do you have any suggestions of things that they can hopefully potentially do while incarcerated to practice the craft, like things on their own, or things they could do to be proactive of maybe starting something? Is there like a checklist or like a list of, making your own runes, for example, like things you would recommend for them to do?
Well, I think depending on where you're located, there are some resources that might be accessible to you. For instance, Mother Earth Ministries has a series of brochures up on their website that they're PDFs, so you can either download them or you can have a loved one on the outside print them and mail them in to you. And I will just mention that a lot of times if you mail something in, it needs to be marked as religious education materials in order for it to properly get through the screening process.
Like written on the envelope.
Yeah, on the outside of the envelope. And then Cherry Hill Seminary has a Pagan Life Academy, which is like a mail order based on the 8 Sabbats, and they're $5 each, so somebody has to pay for it to cover the postage. But it's like a little training course, and if you are just starting out and you're trying to learn, these are some of the resources that you might have access to. But hopefully, if you are in contact with your chaplain, they can work out to find either some volunteers or some sort of local charitable organization that will make a donation of either books or DVDs or pamphlets and brochures to help people get started.
Yeah, and ask more than once. Like, be there. Continue to ask until something happens.
It won't happen the first time.
It won't
Keep
happen
asking.
the first time, yeah.
Well, I appreciate you giving those resources. Are there any things that people can do on their own time to help support their religion while they're incarcerated, potentially waiting for things like those resources to come through?
I think trying to connect with the divine in you or trying to connect with the elements. We did like a little exercise where we had them connect with an element for a month, and they really liked it, and it's something that they're able to do. Let's say, you connect with the element of earth, so you can go outside and sit there on the ground, touch the earth, visualize, meditate, doing things like that. If you have access to books, read. Some of the guys even like start writing their own books as well on the subject.
Yeah, I know there was one book that came out by somebody who was in the prison system, who was a practicing witch. I'll have to see if I can recall the name, unless you happen to know who I'm talking about. But I know he had a book that came out that was actually pretty popular after that.
I know who you're talking about. I just can't remember the name or the name of the book.
Hold on, I'm going to look it up, because if somebody is listening to this and can't look it up, I'm going to look it up for you. Okay, so Aerik has found the title of the book.
Yeah, so while we haven't read the book, we believe it to be High Magic, A Guide to the Spiritual Practices That Saved My Life on Death Row by Damien Eccles.
There we go. I haven't read it either, but I've heard it's a pretty good book.
And for what it's worth, there is also another book out there called Enchantment Encumbered that does kind of take you through the beginnings of Wicca and like casting a circle and stuff like that. But from the perspective of someone who is either in an institution or can't otherwise openly practice.
Oh, that's fantastic. All right. Well, as we get towards the end of the episode, I guess let me ask, do you have any final advice on this topic, or those who are incarcerated, and anything they could do to supplement their practice, or any wise words?
I will just say to keep their voice loud and to voice what they want and what they need. If they don't ask for things, they're not going to get anything. And sometimes it's not the easiest thing to do. And you might find yourself with a lot of obstacles in front of you, but keep on fighting. There's people out there that will help you.
Definitely keep on fighting, keep on asking. And just one thing that has to be understood is that the resources are out there, but they have to be found. So I believe in our facility, people were asking for a group for at least a year before the chaplain was able to find us. And it wasn't because we had been asked for a year. We responded as soon as we were asked, but they had to be able to find us before they had somebody to go in and run those meetings. So sometimes the stars just kind of have to align, but don't let that discourage you. There's always something you can work on in your own personal practice. And a lot of it just comes down to meditation and visualization skills.
Yeah, even if you don't have the tools around you, magic is inside you, regardless of where you are.
It's pretty sound advice. And to be honest, some of that can actually be applied just to the general population as well. Not everybody who wants to practice with a coven has a coven near them. They're even if they've been wanting to practice with, let's say, a particular tradition, if that tradition does not exist anywhere in their local area, then, sometimes it's just how the cookie crumbles. But there are definitely things you could do in the meantime to train yourself up, get familiar with meditation, etc. So yeah, I think that's pretty sound advice for everyone, honestly.
Yep.
Cool. All right. Well, before we end, again, I'm going to ask you one more piece of advice, but it could be about anything. It does not have to do anything with the topic that we talked about. So if you could give one piece of advice each to a beginner, so let's say somebody who may have never even read a book on the topic or cast a circle, what would you say to them?
Well, my piece of advice is to never be afraid to just do things. It doesn't matter if you've read the book or you've learned about it. There's a lot of magic that is just based on doing, and you will only learn by doing it. So don't let any sort of lack of training hold you back. Just go out there. As they say on the Magic School Bus, take chances, make mistakes, and get messy.
I love that.
And I guess from my end, I'll say don't be afraid to ask questions, even if you have read many, many books and you think that you should know something, just ask. There's not a stupid question ever. If somebody looks at you funny, just cut them out of your life. You don't need that kind of energy with you anyway. And just ask. And even if you ask the question 10 times, just ask another time because sometimes you will get different answers and something will connect with you.
Yeah, I love that. You know, you can ask 10 different people and you're going to get 10 different answers for the same question because everybody has their own perspective.
Mm-hmm.
No, great advice. Perfect. Well, thank you both so much for coming on. I know we talked about this a little bit earlier in the episode, but again, if anybody wants to find you or contact you or ask you any questions, where can they find you?
Okay, so I'm all over social media and YouTube. It's at Aerik Arcadian. My website is aericarcadian.com. If you would like to contact our coven or drop an email, the email address is circleofthehornedmoon at gmail.com.
Perfect. And if anybody wants to find me, you can find me on Instagram at Seeking Witchcraft, Facebook at Seeking Witchcraft Podcast. There's a Facebook group for the page called Witches Seeking Witchcraft. And I'm also on Instagram. I have a personal one, Spells and Kettlebells, if anybody's interested in that. But outside of that, if anybody would like to support the show, you could do so on patreon.com/Seeking Witchcraft.
And
All
just
right.
one last thing before I
Of course.
forget.
Of course.
There is currently a program on the Pagan Federation that if you are a member of them, they have a writing ministry where it's basically people just writing to incarcerated pagans. And you don't have to go
Ooh.
anywhere. You can do it from your house. You just have to pay for the stamps. And I think it's a way to connect and help the people who are incarcerated.
If you would be able to send me a link to that, I would be so happy to put that on my bio for this episode.
Absolutely. We'll put it on the chat box.
Amazing. Love that. All right, cool. Well, all of this will be in the episode description for today. And Aerik and Selene, thank you so, so much for coming on and imparting your wisdom on working with this population and just addressing their needs and acknowledging them in our community. And yeah, this has been so enlightening and so educational. I've definitely learned a lot. And yeah, this was really, really cool. Thank you again.
Thank you so much.
Of course.
It was an
And
honor to be here.
Oh, thank you. No, it's an honor to have you both on to discuss this. Absolutely. All right. Well, thank you everybody for listening and have a good rest of your day or evening whenever you're listening to this. Bye.
Bye.